Hi, this is Tina Powell, host of In the Suite, where I sit down with top women leaders and some of the biggest names in the financial services and the wealth management industry. Together, we'll discover some of their best secrets and top strategies to grow a great business, build a strong brand, and lead teams in the 21st century. I hope you'll enjoy hearing their amazing personal stories of triumph, trepidation, and transformation in hopes of becoming better leaders ourselves. The time for you to lead is now, and you're in the suite. Meet Helen Yang, CFA, founder and CEO of Andy's Wealth Technologies, a total onboarding platform which combines behavioral finance with risk analytics to empower financial advisors to differentiate and deliver truly personalized services. Helen is one of the first female fintech veterans with 20 years of experience in finance, business, and technology, starting her career in leadership positions at big corporations, including Thomson, Reuters, and Charles River Development. Helen knows the fintech industry inside and out, even before fintech became in vogue and an industry buzzword. She holds dual bachelors in electrical engineering and math from Tsinghua University, a Master of Science with a concentration in artificial intelligence from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and an MBA from MIT Sloan School of Management. As luck would have it, Helen met Dr. Andrew Lo at MIT and was intrigued by his adaptive markets theory. They worked together and shared the prestigious Harry Markowitz Award in 2011 in the presence of Nobel Prize winner Harry Markowitz himself. Later in her career, while working as a wealth management client, Helen noticed a massive gap in the industry, and she took it upon herself to close that gap. That's where Andy's Wealth Technologies comes into play. Helen founded Andy's Wealth Technologies in 2017, and the goal continues to revolutionize risk solutions for wealth management. As Helen shares, it is the first company to combine behavioral finance with analytics to help financial advisors drastically improve practice management and deliver a client experience like never before. That's good news for Andy's Wealth. For the second year, Andy's Wealth Technologies has been selected as a finalist in the 2021 WealthManagement.com Industry Award in Risk Tolerance and Client Profile category, and for the first time, a finalist in Portfolio Analytics category. In fact, one of the many gifts that you'll discover about Helen, apart from her learning and growth journey, is her extensive volunteerism and commitment to give back to society. She currently serves on the board of Lexington Lions Club and Asian Americans for Equal Rights. Previously, she served on the Appropriation Committee for the town of Lexington. She coached the first Lego League Robotics and youth soccer and established the Community Service Scholarship in Andover, Massachusetts. Listeners will learn from anecdotes that Helen shares about identity, contributions, and challenges experienced by Asian Americans and what we can do to break stereotypes. Helen lives by the philosophy, good deeds for good karma, reflecting the kind-hearted, selfless, and giving person she is. This podcast will bring you true wisdom and fintech faith on how women can reverse engineer to get from point A to point B in the suite. Wow, Helen Yang, take a seat in the suite. Ni hao. Wonderful, wonderful to see you. I'm just so honored that you're here today. We've known each other for years now, and the last time that I saw you was T3, and I'm really excited that I'm going to get to see you at T3 this year. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Tina. Ni hao. I'm so glad to be here. Yes, I remember we met at T3, and I'm really glad that we have remained as friends, and we're going to see each other again at the T3 this year.
We are. And one of the things that you're holding up a very, very cool microphone. And I would expect nothing less from you, Helen. You have been in fintech for over 20 years. You have amassed incredible credentials. You have a vitae that is just mind-blowing. Let me just say that. And now you're holding this really cool mic. I am going to put the selfie that I just remembered to take in there. Tell me a little bit about the device that you're holding right now.
So this is a microphone, and I bought it when I needed to tape some like product demos and stuff for my own marketing purposes. And it looks strange because I don't like to wear things over my head. So I think that might be more efficient, but I ended up choosing this one.
It's so cool. It looks very futuristic.
Thank you.
So we want to dive right in, Helen. In 2017, you founded and became CEO for Andy's Wealth Technologies. You are a chartered financial analyst, a CFA by designation. You also have an incredible education vitae, which we're going to get in as well too. But what makes your company interesting is that Andy's Wealth is the first company to combine both behavioral finance and analytics. And by combining these two factors, you say that Andy's Wealth Technologies is able to deliver more personalized types of services. So tell us a little bit about establishing your company and whose Andy's Wealth Technology is.
Yes, sure. So I started my career in fintech at Thomson Reuters in 1999. That was long before fintech became a buzzword. And as a client of wealth management, I found that the experience was not satisfying. So everywhere I looked, it was the same cookie cutter service. If I had a question, I did get an answer, but it didn't really answer my question. So for example, I'm going to give you an example. If the market has been going down for 3 weeks, when I called the advisor to ask him what to do, he would say, let's look at the 30-year average. So this is like you're outside in the blizzard, looking for shelter, looking for safety. And I tell you, if you wait long enough, the sun will come out. I mean, this is absolutely true. You cannot, debate that, but it is just not helpful. There are more examples we can talk about later. And because of my background in fintech, I was able to realize that financial advisors didn't have the right tools to deliver the kind of insights and personalized services that I was looking for. And I know I can build something to fill the gap. So you mentioned that we are the first company to combine behavioral finance with analytics to empower financial advisors to take the service to the whole new level. And that is very true. And I will get to that in a little bit, how we end up having those ideas. And we also have a very special tool to help financial advisors to better protect baby boomer clients and use the generational wealth transfer.
Yeah. What did you see as a result of the pandemic? I mean, again, you started Andy's Wealth Technologies in 2017. Did you find that because of the pandemic that more users, more advisors were looking at risk tolerance differently because of the pandemic?
Yes, definitely. Because, before the pandemic, when I had to give a demo, when I need to give an example of the financial crisis, I have to go back to 2008, 2009. And sometimes the financial advisors commented that some of their younger clients, they didn't really live through that cycle. So it didn't resonate. Now I would have a much more relevant example that everybody can relate to, during the pandemic. So it took us about a year to build a minimum viable product, and we launched the year before the pandemic, and we got some early clients and built some key integrations. So the clients give us a lot of good feedback, especially how to build out the entire workflow. So during the pandemic, things were relatively quiet. The conferences were all canceled and all that. So we really took advantage of the time to build product enhancements and expand our integrations and getting new clients on board.
And I saw, congratulations on your recent news. So we are going to put a link out in the show notes to Joel Bruckenstein's and Bob Veris's technology T3 Inside Information Software Survey Report. And believe it or not, Helen, even as a marketer, I'm always looking to see how the landscape is evolving. But of particular interest, they even mention Andes Wealth Technologies, and that Andes Wealth has an 8.80 user rating. If I'm not mistaken right now, it is almost the highest of all of the different technologies for risk tolerance here. So what can you share about this? Congratulations on your recent success.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. I am very impressed that people can recognize good work, even though you are a relatively young company. So we have been thinking a lot about the deficiencies in the current risk tolerance, right? A lot of the times it's just a questionnaire. And based on the answer, the advisors would give you an investment recommendation. And the link between the two, it is quite often questionable. And people are often saying those questionnaires, depending on the time of, if they are having a good day or a bad day, or sometimes even weather, a sunny day or a rainy day, the answers can change. So it's not very reliable. And then because I came from an engineering background, I've always tried to come up with solutions that is direct, that people can justify. It is direct and transparent. So what I realized is that in the end, what the advisor wanted to do is to assign them one of their model portfolios. A lot of the advisors use model portfolios. It's a best practice now. So if you were to present their model set from the conservative to the moderate to the aggressive, asking the client to pick one, right? That is the one they're going to get. And then when they pick one, what you need to show them is what is the upside, what is the downside. And they will be able to see, based on the upside and downside, which one do they feel most comfortable with. So that would directly map to the one of the model portfolios.
And I want to give our audience, we're talking about some advanced concepts for people who, especially if you're not in the fields of financial services, wealth tech, fintech, but this is a conversation for everyone. And what Helen's talking about is the fact that when you work with a financial advisor, especially you ladies, right? When we work with different financial professionals, they have to get an understanding of how we feel when things go up and how we feel when things go down. And advisors have to, by law, right, Helen, have some sort of risk methodology in place that creates an investment policy statement. It says, okay, here's Tina's risk profile. Some days, and it's a moving target, right? Because Helen, some days I could feel on top of the world and I'd say, you know what, Helen? I don't care. I want to be in a very risky portfolio. But, what would you say as a basic level to people listening, especially to women who either have been ignored by their advisor, that nobody's really talked to them about risk, or if they did, they talked to them about 10 years ago when they started working with an advisor? Can you give us a little bit of a primer, just basic information, risk tolerance, and why it's important?
Right. So, Tina, thank you very much for the background. Why is this important? Because when the market all goes up, right? When the market is going up, nobody cares. Everybody is happy. But when the market goes down, if you lose 20%, 30%, and then now this is a blaming game starts. So a client says, well, you didn't tell me I could lose 20%. The advisor says, this is beyond my control. I have given you the right portfolio. So there are two things here. One is that the client needs to understand, as they're getting into this, they could lose money, even in a relatively normal market. We are not talking about black swan events like 2008 or pandemic, but even during normal markets, you could potentially lose money. And people talk a lot about diversification. So to the extent that a lot of people are under the wrong impression that if I invest in a diversified portfolio, for example, S&P 500, I'm not going to lose money. So I wanted to have that conversation upfront to tell people that you could lose money. So in our chart, when we show you the upside and downside trade-off, you show the potential upside and the potential downside. The more aggressive portfolio you choose, the higher the potential upside and the higher the potential downside. So have the conversation upfront so people know what they're getting into. And the other aspect is for financial advisors to be able to document. A lot of the times they really didn't do anything wrong, but they just didn't have that conversation enough and didn't document it. So this gives the financial advisor a way to document that the client explicitly agreed to the upside and downside trade-off. And we also have another way to cross-validate, because I really like the traditional questionnaire. There's a value in it. So we use it to play a supporting role to cross-validate the result from the quantitative risk tolerance test. So if the results are close, you know you got it right because you look at two things from two different angles and they confirm each other. If the results are different, for example, if somebody has a relatively low risk appetite, but they choose a more aggressive portfolio, you need to have a more deeper conversation. You know, maybe perhaps they didn't really understand the risk tolerance test, or maybe they were tempted by the upside and didn't think enough about the downside. So we will have that. Basically, we give you a red flag. You will know that you need to dive deeper.
You have taken a really active stance here as number one, a founder of a fintech firm. You have a very interesting backstory of your name, and I thought that I would let you tell that story. I found it very intriguing.
Yeah, a lot of people said, "Oh, Andy's Wealth Technologies. Are you coming from South America?" I was like, "No, I just borrowed the name." So there's a reason I use that name. Growing up, I always longed for mountains and oceans because my hometown was like really flat. There was nothing. And when I was in college, I climbed my first and only snow-covered mountain in the Qinghai Tibetan Plateau. And because it was, the area was pretty high to begin with, and we reached 18,000 feet. That's pretty impressive by Boston standard. And I wanted to name my company after a mountain, but it needs to start with an A because a lot of the places, the company names are listed alphabetically. So, for example, when we were listed as a finalist of the Wealth Management Industry Award, along with Risk Alliance and Totem Risk, we were listed first. That was pretty good.
Oh, that's a great story. Your background is extraordinary. So I do want to talk about your experience at MIT. I want to talk about your work with Dr. Andrew Lo, and specifically the father of modern portfolio theory, Harry Markowitz. This experience must have been extraordinary. Why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. Actually, the company name is also a subtle tribute to Dr. Andrew Lo, and some people call him Andy. And then, as you know, there are two camps in finance. There's efficient markets saying people are rational. The price reflects the value of the company. And there's also another camp called behavioral finance that says people are not rational. We have behavioral biases, and the price may be way out of whack. In 2013, those two camps have been kind of battling each other for several decades. I would say for maybe half a century. I don't know. Maybe it was a very long time. And in 2013, the Nobel Prize Committee awarded the prize in economics to Bob Shiller, known for his prediction of the housing bubble, the 2008 housing bubble, and his book, Irrational Exuberance. So you can see he's in the camp of the behavioral finance. And then, his co-recipient of the award of the same year was Eugene Fama, father of the efficient markets. He's also known for the Fama French factor model. You might not have heard about the model, but You probably have heard about, we talk about small cap versus large cap, growth stocks versus value stocks. That is really the factors we were talking about. So that all came from him. If you think about it, it was as if the Nobel Prize Committee couldn't decide between the two, which one is more right. Or they're just trying to send a message that both aspects are equally important. How do you combine the two? This is where Professor Lowe came in. He's such a nice person. He never says that you're wrong. He always says it has limitations. So that's how he thinks about both theories. Both theories has its limitations. The behavioral finance is, in theory, always correct, but the deficiency is that it is extremely difficult to model. You cannot really use it. So that's why we still need to have that kind of quantitative modeling from the efficient markets. So he tied together and come up with his theory called adaptive market theory. So what basically he's saying that the market for the most of the times it is efficient, but quite often it is not efficient. And for as much as the risk and return relationship exists, it changes all the time. So we need to stay on top of it. We cannot assume there's a static risk and return relationship. So a lot of what we do is inspired by Dr. Lowe and his adaptive market theory. And I worked with him and we shared the Harry Markowitz Award in 2011. So that was indeed an extraordinary experience.
Congratulations. What an honor. And Harry Markowitz is still alive.
Yes. Yeah. When we went to the award ceremony in San Francisco, he was there.
Wow, that is unbelievable. You've got an MBA in finance from MIT. You also have a dual major from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in electrical computer systems and engineering. In Tsinghua, you were a dual BS major in electrical engineering and applied mathematics. So one of the things that we do while we're here in the suite, I'm fascinated to understand the origin stories of the women in this industry. What inspired you to go the STEM route, science, technology, engineering, math, 20 years ago when there wasn't Twitter, there wasn't social media, there weren't initiatives actually bringing women into STEM. What was it for you?
So when I grew up, that was in the 80s in China. And then China at the time, as you probably know, we had the Cultural Revolution. We had, some of the other social experiments before that ended up in absolute disaster. So when we started to open up, started to reform, we talk a lot about science and technology. And that's in the late 70s and 80s. So I felt very lucky. When I was growing up, I actually did not feel a lot of the stigma associated with women in science and technology. Because back then, everybody who is good at science and math, they're encouraged to go that route. In fact, I have some friends who are good in everything. They're good in science and math. They're also good in humanities. If they choose humanities, and then it was strongly discouraged. The teachers and the parents would try to persuade them to go to the other route, partly because the other route has a better job prospect. If you are in China and if you didn't have personal connections, going into the humanities, it doesn't really guarantee the kind of jobs that you might get. So everybody was going in that route. So for me, it was quite natural to get into STEM. And when I got into Tsinghua, because it was a top university, and somehow I think there's still some disparity there. We had much fewer female students. In our department, our class, we had 200 students and there were only 20-some female students. So we are still the minority there. But the students that we were very strong. We were all very strong. It never really occurred to me that being a girl was a liability or people would treat you any differently or think less of you. I think it's only later in life. I don't think it's necessarily a US versus China thing. It's more likely a work versus school thing. Because at school, if you're good at something, it is obvious. You know how to solve a problem when other people didn't know how to solve a problem. But at work, it is less clear cut. So I think that's when I noticed that as a female, you are likely to get less acknowledgements, less recognitions, and less promotional opportunities. I think it's just because it's not as clear cut.
And so what would your advice be to mothers listening right now? And I asked this question to Lakshmi Ramanath, who also too did engineering, 20 years ago. What would your advice be to women today who are in college right now, are about to be in college, or maybe they have the undergrad under their belt and they perhaps want a career in fintech? What would you advise them to do?
I would say don't be afraid. It is possible to have both. I have talked to a number of young workers who are women and thinking of starting a family. They are thinking about, should I start a family? Would that get in the way of my career? And I always advise them to start the family if they are thinking about it, because in the end, I think both are just as rewarding. I have seen female industry leaders who sacrificed their family in order to achieve. They indeed achieve very high. But in the end, when they were looking back, they questioned their decisions, that why they didn't have children. Obviously, there are people who are not inclined to have children. They decided not to have children, not as a sacrifice for the career, but for other reasons. That is perfectly legitimate. I just think that sacrificing having children in order to pursue a career, that often will backfire 20 years later.
As somebody like you, because you have such an impressive vitae, you work for Capgemini, you were a senior consultant, Thomson Reuters, where you were a senior software engineer architect, Charles River Development, where you were on the project management side, data services side. Is the choice to be an entrepreneur or to be a founder, is that a decision that could potentially help women to manage their careers while they're managing a family? Do you have any thoughts about that? I wondered.
Yeah. So entrepreneurs, there are different types. There are types that people can pursue that as a lifestyle choice. And then definitely not in fintech. In fintech, you end up working a lot more because it's not lifestyle that you wanted. I was able to do it because my children were older when we started. They were self-sufficient. They didn't really need me that much. In fact, they were teenagers. They would rather me not bothering them. So
mine too at that point.
Right. But I do see the challenge. To be perfectly honest with you, there have been many times when my children were younger, even with the extraordinary support system that I had. And I had my mother and my mother-in-law. They took turns coming to the U.S. to help us. When they stayed 6 months or a year. So they were extraordinary in helping me. And then my husband is also very supportive. But even with that, we had a lot of struggles with pick up and drop off because my employers at the time, when I was at Thomson Reuters, it was a very long commute. And then Charles River, they didn't offer a lot of flexibility. And so it was a struggle. It was a real struggle. There were many times I was thinking I would quit. And then as an entrepreneur, even though I worked so much harder, I start every day at 8 o'clock. I finish around 11 or 12 every night. But it did give me the flexibility to drop off and pick up my kids as needed. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I was able to do that.
And not only that, I mean, you were coach of their soccer team.
Yeah, right? That is something that I'm very proud of because I actually never played soccer before that. So when they were calling for coaches, I just stayed silent. I was like, I'm not even qualified. Even though I wanted to help, I wasn't qualified. And they kept asking and asking because there wasn't enough people. So I eventually raised my hand. I said, I'm not good at this, but if you're willing to take anybody, I can step up. So they provided training. I remember it was 8 hours of training and like in twice, 4 hours each time. And then I actually scored a goal in one of the training sessions.
And what I read is what I loved about what I read about that experience about you, Helen. you wanted to give equal playing time, that was a focus of your being a soccer coach. And I remember, believe me, I remember those years where kids were sidelined. And then I think it starts to bridge the story of you being an advocate. And one of the things I want to say to our audience is that, Helen, how long have we had this date in place for you to be here?
Oh, in the United States, I came in 1995. So it has been 6 years. Yeah.
But I mean today, like you coming here today, we have had the date for this episode for months.
Right.
For months, you and I have had this date for the episode. And you have been an advocate for equal rights for Asian Americans. And a couple of weeks ago, we witnessed the horrific and brutal killing and discrimination around Asian Americans. And what I find so divine here is that we had this date and that you have spent much of your career. Yes, you've been on the Fintech side, but you have spent years and years of your life being a civil rights advocate. So how are the organizations that you're working with right now, how are they supporting equal rights? And what would you like the audience to know?
Yeah, thank you. So this is a very relevant topic. I started realizing the discrimination of Asian Americans when my son was young. You know, he was like in pre-K or kindergarten. He had showed tremendous intellectual curiosity. So I started to worry, I was like, he was going to do well in school. What can we do? Because he's going to fall into the stereotype and he's going to be discriminated for doing well at school. And when I shared that concern with my husband, he said, well, it's not like he's going to be better off not doing well at school. So, so it's like, no matter what you do, it's not going to be good. So since then, I started to pay attention and then gradually got involved with some organizations. And I, through learning from those earlier pioneers, I have learned that the discrimination of Asian Americans really goes back all the way to the 1860s. That was when the time the United States was building the transcontinental railroad, and 15,000 Chinese laborers worked on the railroads. And when they finished, and there was a symbolic picture of all the contributors, there was not a single Chinese there. And in fact, those Chinese laborers, they were assigned the most difficult and dangerous sections through the mountains in the West. And they were paid less and given worse lodging accommodations. So, but they were getting no recognition. In fact, it was a lot worse than that. When the railroad finished in 1869, a year later, the Congress passed the Naturalizations Act of 1870, prohibiting the naturalization of Chinese Americans. And 5 years later, the Page Act effectively prohibited the entry of Chinese women because a lot of those laborers, they were single young men. Their hope is to go back to, to get bring a bride from their hometown to the United States. That pretty much closed the door to that. And then in 1882, the Congress officially passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which lasted till 1965. So that's a whole century of exclusion. And, during the civil rights movements, Asian Americans fought along with African Americans, Latinos, and many white people, and things got a lot better. But the prejudices and stereotypes and the discriminations still remained. And Harvard University, it was only in recent years, Harvard University argued in court that there was no discrimination when Asian American applicants got lower personality scores. So basically, they're saying that they deserved it. And the court actually agreed. So I was there. It was when the court hearing, it was in Boston. So I went there 3 times. I went to the court 3 times, sitting there. And it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. Wow. That's an amazing story. And I want to credit also to Sonia Dreisler. It's uncomfortable for Americans to have these conversations around discrimination, violence, racism. And I wouldn't normally put that in the questions to ask you today, because it would be a subject that would be very hard to talk about. And we had Sonia Dreisler, she's episode 35. And she said to me and to our audience, we learned something that we need to check in and to see how people are doing, because the trauma that we're seeing on social media has real deep effects. Because again, to your point, Helen, these things have existed for hundreds of years. And then we see an episode that brings us back. It's a form of post-traumatic stress disorder for people.
Right. I mean, we are learning too. We are learning to voice our concerns. I think we are getting better at it. As my friend Bob Veras said, the recent events, quote, was where some of the latent ugliness suddenly became visible to a lot of Americans, unquote. We come to realize a lot of the times prejudices stem from not knowing instead of ill intentions. So we wanted to start the education first, starting with educating ourselves. When I first came over here, I got myself a book of Asian American history, and I wasn't interested. I feel like, those railroad workers, that's not me. I came here as a high-paying, high-tech workforce. So it's not part of my history. And now I have come to realize that this is very much my history too. So I have been watching PBS documentary called Asian Americans. They made it available for everyone last year during the Asian Heritage Month. And then recently they have made it available to everybody again. So just Google PBS Asian American, and we urge everybody to watch it and to learn our history and know that really Asian Americans, we are first and foremost Americans. So our members of Asian American for Equal Rights and the local organizations, we have been working with our towns and schools to promote the education of Asian American history. And I hope that would help clear up some of the prejudices and the stereotypes.
Hey, listeners, you can now text me at 201-581-3983 to join our community in the suite. After you do that, I'll be inspiring you, lifting you up, and supercharging your life and career with awesome quotes, resources, videos, and tips we learn from our great guests. It couldn't be any easier. Just text 201-581-3983 to join our text-based community in the suite. What else can we do, right? So Americans trying to help our Asian American friends here who have helped to create this great country that we're all so fortunate to live in. How can we do a better job supporting Asian Americans? What do you want people to know?
Thank you for this question. So a lot of people perceive Asians as foreigners, and a lot of people subconsciously have that. So I will give you an example. So if I go to the White Mountains for a hike, and if I have a casual conversation with another hiker, they would ask you, where are you from? I would say, I'm from Massachusetts. And they would say, where are you really from? So often people are just trying to be friendly. But if you think about it, what does it mean? It means that you cannot be an American. You have to come from somewhere, right? You do not belong here. So I recently met this gentleman, Wilson Lee. He is a 5th generation Asian American. In fact, he has also grandchildren already. So his grandchildren are 7th generation Asian American. And then his great-great-great-grandfather came to the States to work on the railroad. So he says, even him being here for so many generations, he is still perceived as a foreigner. So I want you to think about it. When next time you see an Asian face, think again. If you assume they're foreigners, think again. Because I know sometimes people don't really have any bad intention. It's just a conceptual bias, right? So if you try to catch that, next time if you talk to someone, and don't treat them differently. Try not to treat them differently.
Really good advice. We need to all watch the PBS documentary and watch our questions. I'm so grateful that you're a woman in fintech and that you have this extraordinary vitae. You have been involved in your kids, your family, your business. You've provided opportunities for coaching in soccer, for civil rights, as well as helping to lead teams around robotics, AI, the first Lego League. Those are the things I'm fascinated to learn about you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Because I try to be helpful. So when my kids, when they were younger, they were engaged in activities. I always try to help out. So the robotics, when my daughter signed up for the first Lego League, and I was like, oh, this is something I can help. Because as you mentioned, I was in computer engineering and at RPI. So what I did was robotics and AI. That was before AI became hot. So there was the winter of AI. And so we actually made it to the state. My daughter was very happy about that. So
congratulations. That's that's an achievement in itself.
Thank you. So I do find, a lot of the times you never know what leads to what. So when I was looking for funding for my company, and I'm not the kind of person who would hit people for money. So it was really offered to me when they learned that I needed funding. I was offered funding from two groups of people. One group of people was my classmates. So in college. So that summer, before we had funding, I was like, this is my last chance to actually do something visiting family. So our family went back to China in the summer for 3.5 weeks. So we had a mini reunion with some of my college friends. And I didn't even say anything. It was another classmate who were talking about doing a startup. So my husband said, I am doing a startup too. So 3 people offered to invest. And then there were people who I did community work with because they trusted me so much and they were willing to invest. So I think, sometimes when you do good deeds, you are not thinking that somebody may in the end do you a favor, but quite often people end up helping each other in other ways too. So I would say sometimes people say no good deeds get unpunished, but I would say a lot of times good deeds bring good karma. So keep it up.
That's extraordinary. I love how you just phrased it. You never know how one thing is going to lead into another thing. And it's one of the things, too, that I think we're all, since the pandemic, really aligning our choices, how we spend our time, where we travel to, our work, our careers, what we do with our time is now measured by a different scale. And you've been involved in a lot of great projects. I'm so happy and so pleased for your success. I did see that you were on also to the Wealthies Digital Forum. So I want to make sure that we get that in there. And I will absolutely have a link to the show notes because these Wealthies Digital Forums to learn more about Andy's Wealth Technologies and just to acquaint yourself with these concepts. Like that's what In the Suite is designed to do. It's designed to help people to explore topics, origin stories, amazing stories like Helen's here about how women get from point A to point B, especially mid to senior level careers. What do you want to say about that? What were some of the takeaways from that panel session that you had?
Right. So at the forum, I mentioned the disconnect between the risk tolerance and the investment recommendations. So one of the person in the audience, whose name is Tom, it really resonated with him. And then he reached out to me afterward. And then we had a really nice conversation. And then we sort of became quick friends because, we shared something common. And then it just so happened he was looking for a job. He was interviewing for a job. And then he had gone through several rounds. And then it was a final round. He needed to do a case study. And he had a great story to tell. And I helped him review the material and get some suggestions. So he just called me yesterday that he got the job. So
oh, that's such a great story. See, it's that whole spontaneity factor. You were in the right place, that you were just doing what came naturally to you, Helen.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Because I have been helped by a lot of people. So whenever I can, I try to give back a little bit. A lot of times I am really humbled by what people do for others. When I was doing the MIT program, the MBA program, I did the mid-career program for executive program. So it was a 1-year full-time program. And then for local students, they give you the option to take it in 2 years. Because I lived pretty far from Cambridge. So I took the 2-year option so that I could have a little bit of time with my kids. So at the time, my kids were in elementary school, and they had an amazing after-school program, and they had an art club during after school. I joined them to learn oil painting and to do crafts and stuff. And then the art teacher, we obviously pay for those extra classes. And then it turns out that she never really, used the money for anything other than buying supplies for the class. So we got like top-notch supplies, the oil canvas, oil, those materials. And then she never really, get rewarded herself for all the work. And then it wasn't because she was rich. In fact, I went to her house a few times. She had this little house next to a fancy neighborhood. So she was not rich. And I have come to find that a lot of people who are very generous, very kind, a lot of times they're really not in the position, to be generous, but it's just part of their nature. So I am so inspired by people like this. And I try to, learn as much from them as possible.
Are you still doing art too to this? Are you still doing anything on the hobby side?
Not right now, but I can tell you that when my kids were doing stuff, when my daughter was learning skating, she took skating lessons for like 2 years, and they had a little section on the side for adults to take skating. So I took that. I didn't really get very far. It took me like 2 years, numerous sessions. I went from adult 1 to adult 2, and I got stuck at adult 2.
Oh, wow. That's so fun. I think that it was just the fact that it was offered. I have now been back to horseback riding. And so it was something that I did, that my father did with me when I was very young. And so now I am getting horseback riding lessons. And I have to tell you, it's so great. Again, the kids are grown, right? And then I think at some point we come back to our hobbies and the things that really fueled our soul and that, makes us feel like alive and young again. This year, I've been very intentional about making sure that it's not all work, because like to your point, right? You're working 12 hours a day as an entrepreneur, sometimes 15 hours. And yes, there's never enough time to do everything that we want that's in our mind. At the same time, we really push ourselves. So Helen, before we get to our last question, I would love to get that Tom, who is listening to this episode right now, who wants to be able to get in touch with you and some of the women that we have here in the suite. What's the best way to get in touch with you, Helen?
Yeah, email is the best way to get in touch. My email is helen.yang@andyswealth.com. Or if it's easier, you can use info@andyswealth.com. You can also follow us on Twitter @andyswealth and request a demo from the company website, andyswealth.com. Even if you just want to get in touch, not requesting a demo, you can use the link so that we will get in touch with you.
Okay, great. And so what we're going to do here too in the suite is we're going to make sure that we have links to the website, your LinkedIn. We would encourage you to connect with Helen on LinkedIn and see all of the great things that she's doing at Andy's Wealth Technologies. And we'll also have your Twitter handle. What we'll also do too is to make sure that the link for the T3 technology tools survey. Again, I encourage you, if you're working in wealth management, fintech, especially, get your hands on that survey. It's providing a lot of useful data, and it's evaluating a lot of the incumbents as well as the new entrants to, certain aspects of our industry. And again, congratulations, Helen. That's really fantastic for this year's survey. So one of the questions that we're asking, what do you think needs to be on a reading list this year for 2021? What's got your eye?
So I can give you two recommendations. One recommendation is an audiobook that I just finished listening to. It was called Nomadland. So that was hot right now because there was a movie that was made based on that got a lot of attention. So I listened to it. I actually was deeply moved by the people in the book. One of the characters that they profiled was Linda May. And, before that, I always thought that maybe if people maybe they were not hard workers, but it turns out that they are not only like hard workers, they were also savvy, had real expertise. So it really made me feel that the system is not quite fair to a lot of these people who are working really hard, but still couldn't afford the basics, like having an apartment on that. And some of the people they talked about in the story are people who lost their savings during, say, the 2008 financial crisis. Given my background in finance, the first question that came to my mind was that they probably had their investments in the wrong place. And so, otherwise, if you're getting close to retirement, your exposure to the stock market should have been reduced. And then so it shouldn't have wiped out everything. I think that there were, at the time, a lot of people invested in Lehman Brothers, their own funds, it got wiped out. And then, there may be people who have overbought their house. When the house valuation went down, they got wiped out. So I think a lot of the times from our perspective, how we as the professionals in the industry help everybody and help put them in the right investments, give them the right advice. I think it is very important because right now, only the rich people can afford financial advice. That is not right. In fact, one of my professors at RPI, he's retired now. So I used to visit him every summer. I didn't go last summer. But for years, he has been telling me every time I saw him, he was like, "You're helping rich people." It made me feel really bad, And then even though we are very, affectionate with each other. And then it was only when I started telling him my community work, he was like, "You're a good one."
Professors will do that.
Right. So the other book I wanted to recommend is The Undoing Project. So this book talks about how Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky became the founding fathers of behavioral economics. It was written by Michael Lewis. He did a really good job making the story interesting because in the back of the storyline, it is also how these two people, how their friendship developed, how they ended up having some conflicts. And in the end, they reconciled. So it was a very fascinating story of humanity and friendship as well. And many of you have heard about Michael Lewis from his book, Moneyball.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, so if you remember, you probably remember, it told the story of how Oakland Athletics was able to win with a small budget by picking overlooked players using a data-driven approach.
Yeah.
Because human judgment, the theory was that human judgment can be wrong. Like when you pick players, even by professional scouts, that process is deeply flawed. For example, handsome players are often overvalued. If the player looks like a famous player, that tend to be overvalued. And a player, if you give them an unflattering nickname, they will end up being undervalued. So there was a team that actually set a rule that you cannot give anybody a nickname because it somehow influences the decision making. And then Jeremy Lin, as you know, he was considered not very athletic by human scouts because the stereotype of Asian Americans. But when you're using a data driven approach, he is proven to be extremely athletic. So it really just shows how human judgment can be flawed. In other words, the market for baseball players and basketball players, they are not efficient because people have biases. And so this book, The Undoing Project, conceptually can be considered as a sequel to that book because that helps explain, the first book is saying we do have biases. The second book really says, where does that bias come from? And those biases, a lot of the time, they are very persistent. They are reliably persistent. They are reliably wrong. Like people are often reliably wrong. So it was really interesting. When I was reading the book, I was assuming they were, economists and so on, but they were not. When they first started out, their research was not related to finance at all. So when Danny Kahneman was a young man, he was a 20-year-old psychologist, fresh out of college pretty much. He was assigned a task by the Israeli army to identify which men would make good officers, which men wouldn't. And it turned out his predictions were totally useless. So that kind of got him started on understanding the limitations of human judgment. And basically their research, they worked together for many years. They revealed how our intuitions about probability and numbers are often wrong. And that's because we have deep-rooted biases. And a lot of the times, those biases are rooted in our survival instincts, like going back thousands of years. So after they got kind of famous, their work got the attention of economists such as Richard Thaler. And so that's when we started having behavioral economics. So that was sort of the story.
That's so interesting. I'm really excited that we'll put those links to those books in the show notes. What's even more exciting is how you've weaved a story of this whole idea of behavioral biases, analytics, data, faulty decision-making, risk tolerance, and how it's all kind of come together. And so I'm sure that people listening to these concepts now, maybe even some for the very first time, you've given us such great stories and such useful applications about thinking about how we use them in our daily life without even realizing it, Helen.
Right. I can give you a few examples, of common behavioral biases that we all have. So one example is loss aversion. So sometimes it's also called prospect theory. And what it really says is that the pain of losing is twice as strong as the pleasure of gaining. So in fact, if you think about what happened during pandemic, when the stock market dropped 30%, the kind of emotion, the kind of panic was extremely strong. And right when it gained 30% in 2019, and when it gained a lot during the rest of 2020, and the kind of emotion, the kind of joy was nowhere near as strong. So it's not like we shouldn't feel that way. It is human to feel that way. But if you know that is because of loss aversion, and you would keep your emotions in perspective.
Right. Didn't we see a lot of people at the beginning of the pandemic run to their advisor, get me out of the market. This is another recession, right? And maybe if you're allocated correctly in the first place with a good risk tolerance tool, that maybe then you understand when things go awry in the market, natural ups and downs happen all the time, that you're not going to react, or at least you're not going to try to pull your money out of the market, right? There are studies that keep your money invested rather than pull it out, put it back in, make a trade, and do all kinds of maneuvers to try to time the market, that being invested is the best strategy.
And that is so true, because people cannot help their emotions. The best way to counter that is to show them what's really going on, because people are influenced by the recent events. So that's why we show people slightly longer terms. Because right now, if you talk to an advisor, their tool is that if they can show you what the 30-year average looks like. And it's just not relevant enough. So what we show them is that what it looked like in the 1 month, what it looked like in 3 months, so and 6 months, 1 year. So that is very relevant for people to look at. And this is something really unique because a lot of the systems that has risk analytics, they do it quarterly or monthly. It doesn't really help when the market dropped for 3 weeks. You go back saying, oh, let me show you what it looks like in the last quarter. So yeah, it is so true. So advice may not be wrong, but just how do you get there? How do you have that conversation to make it convincing, to give them some real insights? I think this is an area that we can do a lot more.
Thank you so much, Helen. 谢谢你, Helen.
Oh, 谢谢你, Tina.
Boucher. Wonderful to see you today. We can't thank you enough for being here. And I'm really happy with all of the discussions and the thinking that now we're going to do. As a result of having you here in the suite, we are much better off for it.
Oh, thank you so much, Tina. Yeah, you are very kind.
Thank you. And I will see you at T3. Looking forward to seeing you in person at T3. So wonderful to see you there again. So thank you again, Helen. Be well.
Thank you, Tina. Take care.
You too. You're listening to In the Suite, a podcast that shares amazing stories of women in business in the financial services and the wealth management industry. Our producers are Tina Powell and Kevin Hirshorn. Our editor-at-large is Kevin Hirshorn. Our content writers are Dimple Ramchandani, Carmen Varner, Sarah Smirker, and Tina Powell. Our research and technical assistants are Sarah Smirker and Rachel Powell. In the Suite podcast is sponsored by C-Suite Social Media, a digital marketing and social media agency for C-Suite leaders in finance and technology. You can visit csuitesocialmedia.com to learn more. And thank you so much for listening and subscribing and giving us 5-star reviews. We are so grateful to you. We've got listeners in 646 cities and 40 countries. Wow. Thank you, US, France, Japan, Singapore, Indonesia, and the UK. This podcast was inspired by you and created for you, ladies. So please let us know how you enjoyed this episode with Helen Lang and share your thoughts on LinkedIn and Twitter, #InTheSuite. You can connect with Helen on Twitter at Andes Wealth. That's ANDES Wealth. You know how to spell that, and LinkedIn, and visit her website at Andes Wealth, ANDESWEALTH.com to learn more. And always, if you would like to share the name of our rock star woman in financial services you think we should interview in 2021, please send it to me and we'll consider it. That's Tina at InTheSuitePodcast.com. Again, thank you so much for listening and subscribing to In the Suite.